a lot of pauses and a lot of repeating movements, a lot of back and forths, and a lot of touching and grabbing, a lot of gesture, a lot of like stutters in that way. Something that's in the process, but something that can't really come out until something's formed. My name's Lucy, and I'm an artist, and a lot of my practice, I suppose, revolves around looking at how we can generate non-linear systems, so how we can interrupt certain productions with either repeating or recomposing different fragments, and then that enables a type of slippage of knowledge, and then different objects can come together to create or generate newer ways of thinking. A lot of my references, I would say, come from provisional architectures or certain architectures that have failed to become realised. I'm really interested currently in the Radiant City, which is an architecture, well, it was a planned building that never became realised, and I'm also really interested in the, if I'm pronouncing it right, the Crevalli building in Rome, because it's a site of transformation. So it was a building that was built basically out of concrete, and it's 1 kilometre long, and it had these aspirations to be this sort of utopian social housing, but it never really became that. So you have these people who are still living there because it's still a residential property, an area that people live, but you have this site that's became quite graffitied, and people who live there have had to learn how to use that architecture and how to kind of create a social environment for themselves to live in. There's a really, really great essay in Cruising Utopia, and it talks about the queer performativity and how gay nightclubs and stages become a possibility of your future self. So where you can rehearse and reenact who you will become. I've titled my method now. I've called it gestural stutters. So it's the way that I normally make work is I'll be reading an essay, or I'll be reading about the Radiant City, or I'll be reading an essay on iron construction because I'm really interested in Walter Benjamin's arcade projects. And there'll be a like glue, or there'll be a ceramic, or there'll be a weird sponge that's kind of just been left in my studio. And so the proximity of kind of reading about iron construction, or the proximity about reading about sites or spaces, would then be inhabited within the objects within my studios. So they become inherent in the things that I'm reading. Around the time I was reading Arcade Project, which is if I was ever on a desert island and I could only take one book, it would be Arcade Project by Walter Benjamin. And I was reading Arcade Project, specifically his essay called The Rings of Saturn, or On Iron Construction. And it was talking about the rings of Saturn and kind of these hobgoblins being able to go outside of Saturn and walk around the rings to get a breath of fresh air. And around the same time, I got really interested in repeating pattern, or this like circular motion, but kind of how can we interrupt that with a gesture? I think the interruption in this case was me drawing a circle and not being perfect. The material is aluminium tape, so it's just kind of looking at these like flimsy and floppy and like slippy ways of making, and also the material that inhabits that thought. How do you make something that's virtual physical? So I really like the idea of like pasting these pieces of paper, and then you put them around Digbeth or put them around Birmingham, and then you can go together with a friend, and then that becomes a journey within itself. All the things that were around me when I was going on a walk, or when I was getting the bus to the studio, they became it's almost what I was thinking about became inhabited within what I was seeing. So I was really obsessed with a stone, this like one stone that had this like metal pipe coming out of it, and I was so obsessed, and I convinced myself that this stone was Tatlin's tower. Yeah, found objects I think have a greater ability to have potentials, but there's definitely this idea of like dissolving boundaries within the work, and then that's where the slippage happens. The kind of the relationships or the proximities of different materials and ideas. That's where the non-linear thought comes in.